All right, let me tell you all about something. So I said during that, how come nobody talks about the time all the Inuits became prisoners? And somebody said, Stocky, what? And then somebody said, Stocky, we've been finding them in the Catholic schools. No, not what I'm talking about. Okay, it's a totally different thing. I got to tell you all about this because a lot of people don't know history, okay? A lot of people don't know history. So I feel like this was a fun little, not a fun little, but a crazy little whiteboard to do because I feel like a bunch of people may not be completely aware of what happened. And you know what? Why not? Let's do a little history whiteboard because it's kind of relevant. And I think it'd be really cool to talk about because I feel like history is really interesting. Especially, I find the things I find the most is history about things the U.S. government intentionally hid from its people in order to drive a narrative. I'm not about to do some like conspiracy theory thing. It's just about things that were found out later that the government purposely hid and that most people don't know about because of that. Okay? All right, so let's do this. Like the Epstein files, I knew it was coming. It actually took longer than I thought. So we're often told that the United States has only been invaded once since it became a country, right? War of 1812. And Canadians, y'all been lied to. We burned your White House down, eh? Sorry about that. No, you guys didn't do shit. You were a bunch of fucking beaver fur trader shitheads who got used by the British to fucking go around the Great Lakes to come down to DC, okay? You guys didn't do shit, okay? You guys, we burned down your White House, eh? I'm sorry about that. No, you didn't fucking burn shit, you fucking beaver trapping fucking fur traders. You weren't shit, okay? You weren't even, never mind, I'm sorry. I'm gonna get onto it, right? Okay, so here's my thing. And you got taken over by a bunch of drunk Irish guys from New York City and held ransom to the UK in exchange for Ireland being fucking freed or whatever. And then they realized that this wasn't going to work out as well as they thought. They got sober and they left. But moving on, okay? All right, so this is not true. The United States has been invaded one other time before since then, okay? And they don't teach you this in history. They don't tell you this in history class, okay? And that's right. Two things you may not know. Number one is that the Japanese actually killed American civilians in mainland America, okay? And that is because during World War II, Japan decided to use the fucking jet stream. And they took a whole bunch of balloons with rockets on them, and they sent them up into the jet stream hoping that it would eventually come to America. And a whole bunch of them didn't make it. They fell in the ocean, they drifted off, they fell out of that, but a couple of them made them. And one of them actually fell in the Pacific Northwest. And it fell on the ground. And a family picnicking found it. And it exploded and they died. Interesting enough. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the time Japan invaded the United States. That's right. Japan invaded the United States during World War II. So, y'all have heard of the 1942. You heard of the Battle of Midway, right? All right, big one. They did a movie with one of the Jonas Brothers. It was a terrible fucking movie, but it was a cool piece of history. Battle of Midway. This was the turning point of the Japanese and the American battle for the Pacific, right? I mean, some people will say Iwo Jima was or this was, but Midway was really the turning point, right? And it was a monster battle. Okay, it was a monster naval battle, air battle, everything like that. Well, the Japanese wanted to divert some of our fleet from Midway and from that expansion. So they thought that they were going to cause a distraction, right? So how could they cause a big distraction? Well, how would they do that? Well, first you had the bombing of Dutch Harbor. We'll talk about that another time. But I want to talk about the invasion of Attu. This is actually a really cool piece of history. Now, the reason that you don't hear about this is that the United States government never talked about it because they never wanted the public to know that Japan actually landed troops in, and by the way, Alaska wasn't a state yet. It was a territory, but it was still American. It was still a part of America. They didn't want the public to know about Japan actually having an invasion and a ground combat and hand-to-hand fighting in the United States on United States territory, right? Like they didn't want that to be a part of it. Remember, FDR and his administration actually pulled the FTC, or they weren't back the FTC back then, but they actually pulled the permits and licenses of a lot of radio stations and TV stations who did not agree to broadcast only what the government said that they could do. This is a true story. They actually pulled their permits and their licensing and wouldn't let them have their licenses to broadcast if it wasn't what was approved by the government. And this was part of it, right? Again, and some people say ends justify the means, different conversation, but the invasion of Attu. So in 1942, the Japanese decided we need a distraction. We need to pull the U.S. forces away from Midway. So how do we do that? We go all the way the fuck up to Alaska, okay? All the way up to Alaska. And they go there, and 2,500 Japanese Imperial Army troops, I'll just call it troops, land, okay? They land there. And they go to one of the Aleutian Islands. Now, the crazy thing is that there was actually no military base there. There was no U.S. military base on the island, okay? There was no military presence there. But there were a bunch of Inuit people that lived there, okay, like civilians. Because remember, this was like a few years after we bought it from Russia, okay? So, or a few years, it's been a while since there, but like, you know, it still wasn't a state, and we didn't really do anything yet. So like, there were just a bunch of random fucking Inuit people that were on this island that were just hanging out one day, and this giant force landed on the island. And they captured like 42 or upwards of 50 of these civilians and immediately interned them. Looking, these guys had nothing to do with this. They weren't Americans. They weren't citizens. They were just a bunch of what we used to call Eskimos before it was like inappropriate, but Inuits just hanging out one day, you know, eating some seal or some shit. And the Japanese got them and interned them. And like most of them fucking died, right? Like from disease and malnutrition, and some of them for torture. Had nothing to do with it, but they just did it. They didn't want them running off and alerting anybody. Okay. So they do this. Now, all of a sudden, the Japanese have this island. So for those of you guys who know Alaska, right, you've got this big land, and then you got the little thing, and you got the Aleutian Islands. So they land on Attu over here. Well, here's the problem. Normally, you wouldn't give a shit, but guess what? The Japanese were quick in building air bases and airstrips on islands. And so with the occupation of this island, not only did they land on American soil, but they could set up an air base that could actually, because they probably thought they were going to get resistance, they actually can set up an air base to attack, you know, the West Coast without having to cross the entire ocean. Pretty concerning if you're the American military. So eventually the U.S., of course, they knew this was happening. They quietly built bases a couple islands over because Japan had landed there without like a real big plan, and they weren't like doing a whole bunch of recon, but they started setting up these small bases. They're like, oh shit, we got to do something, right? We got to take care of this. Like we can't just let this go unanswered, but we don't want to start anything. And what they ended up doing is they started doing air raids on this Japanese base on Attu. And so they started bombing them and started shooting at them. And they did some underwater, like, submarine shit where they were, like, cutting off, setting up things where there wouldn't be any supplies coming. So now the Japanese realize that, like, this isn't going to be easy. But Japanese were wild when it came to this stuff. Like, they were, like, fight to the last man, fight to the death, no honor, or no shame, no honor kind of thing, right? So then March, I think March of the following year, 1943, that's when the battle happens. Okay, and it was the Battle of the Komodorsky, something like that, islands, right? Like they've got this battle happening, right? And it was, the last major daytime surface ship battle of the war, right? Like after this, like, because they'd already, Midway, whatever, but we had to take care of this, okay? And the reason that this was so intense was because the U.S. forces overwhelmed them, the only way the Japanese soldiers on this island could actually get supplies was via submarine because of this battle. So now they're getting cut off, okay? I know I'm taking too long on this, but it's such a cool piece of history, okay? It's just a cool piece of history, okay? If you want me to, I'll wrap it up. Okay. So this is the fun part. The crazy part. So now here we go. We've got this happening. Okay. Then in May, the Battle of Attu Island happens. History didn't teach you this shit. Okay. Because they didn't want you to know about Japan doing this. So in May of 43, the Battle of Attu Island occurs. It was like I said, history doesn't teach you this stuff. 11,000 U.S. troops. Okay, 11,000 U.S. troops from the 7th Infantry, and crazy enough, some Canadians, right? Because remember, Canada was on our side, and like this was the closest they were. Like we actually had Canadians that helped us with this. Canada, I know they probably didn't teach you this either. But Americans from the 7th Infantry and Canadians decide that it is time, right? And so they land on Attu Island, but it was completely fucking covered in fog, and the island is muddy. Because remember, it's just rain, sleet, snow, and cold and fog, right? Because it's in that weird area up there. Completely covered in fog. Nobody can see shit. And it's muddy, and then it's quiet. And so the American troops start like moving through the island. And then they hear these screams, right? These war cries. And that's when they did their bonsai charges. And their bonsai charges were like ground versions of kamikaze, fighters. Like they just charge, fucking bayonets, shooting and everything like that, and just try to just fear and overwhelming force and just charge the Americans, right? And it didn't work out for them. I mean, it was pretty brutal. I mean, it was pretty brutal. It was a very, very bloody battle. And the Japanese were outnumbered, so they did a lot of damage, but based on attrition, the American military just repelled them. And over 3 weeks that happened. The only thing is that the Americans ended up winning this, but they didn't realize it was over, right? They didn't realize it was over. The Japanese ended up retreating in that fog and all that shit, okay? And so, like, they don't know that the Japanese have retreated. So the U.S. had lost a few troops, but they did pretty good considering those bonsai attacks. But then the ghost battle happened. Here's the crazy part, okay? I know I'm taking too long, okay? I'm taking too long. But listen, this is fun. This is fun. Well, it's like a cool piece of history. So a ghost battle happened. Now, what this was, remember the whole thing I did on the Karen Seppi battle? Similar thing here. They're doing their patrols and someone like pops off a shot or yells or something like that, and they had gotten separated and they thought it was the Japanese, but it was each other. And so they ended up, and this was in it's a different island called Kisaki or something like that. There were 34,000 troops, okay, U.S. and Canadian. And it was abandoned because the Japanese had disappeared, right? There was like 5,000 troops there. They disappeared in the fog 2 weeks before they landed on this island. And that's where the ghost battle happened. Like, they didn't know that they were gone and they thought they were fighting them. So, but that's when the Japanese left. So most of the casualties for this in the U.S. were there. There's also a story of a guy named Private Martinez. So there was this guy who was a U.S. guy, and during these attacks, he left his regiment or whatever and fucking just bull rushed. They called him the Bull of Attu or whatever. Bull rushed a Japanese machine gun nest and fucking hand-to-hand combat and wiped everybody out and allowed a lot of this to happen. But so basically that was it. So basically this was a battle and a campaign that was fought in secrecy on an island off of Alaska. Naval battle, submarines, fucking, secret air bases, fought in the fog, winds of 100 miles an hour, freezing cold temperatures, and it was the summer. And it's called the Forgotten Battle, but it was forgotten on purpose. And the crazy thing about it is that Japan did this to divert America, but it turned out that this caused Japan to have to divert their resources and actually led to even more expedited U.S. force takeover in the Pacific theater, all because of this one small battle. And the one thing I will say about it is that the real people who got screwed on this, were the local Inuits, okay? So casualties, the Japanese, I mean, there's no guarantee, no, because there was a lot of unknowns that happened there. But for Japan, they lost about 2,500 troops. And obviously they lost some of their ships and stuff like that during the naval battles. The United States, Japan also had about I think something like 500 people captured. The U.S. had a lot of wounded outside of their own that ghost battle, but most of them were from frostbite. Okay, so they had like 1,100 wounded. Of course, the U.S., like I said, we probably had more U.S. killed, but they kept it quiet for a long time, so we'll never really know. But there were like 1,200 like severe cold and flu symptoms. 600 people got like exposure problems, and then 28 to 35 people killed in the ghost battle. But the real they also lost 600 people, I should say. 600 people. Again, 600 killed. I don't want to give the number because I don't really feel like we really get it, but there were 600 Americans. The U.S. lost 600 KIA. Okay, so Japanese lost 2,500, had 500 captured. The U.S. had 600 KIA, 1,100 wounded, and obviously the ghost battle. But the civilians, that was the messed up part. The fucking guys who were just hanging out on this island eating fucking seal and shit got captured in turn by the Japanese. 16 of them died while in captivity. But they weren't the most egregious. 880 of them were evacuated by the U.S. into, guess what? The Japanese internment camps. Sorry, it's not funny, but it was fucked up. They had nowhere to put them. So they evacuated them and put them in internment campers and then barred from ever returning back to their island. I'm not making this up. This is the worst part of the story. These guys were hanging out on an island one day, nowhere in fucking Alaska, nowhere near Japan, the United States, had nothing to do with this. Next thing you know, Japanese troops land, fucking take a bunch of people and turn them for whatever fucking reason, right? Then there's a bunch of Japanese fighting and Americans fighting and stuff like that. Americans end up winning. Then they take you off your island, fly you into fucking put you in an internment camp, and then bar you from ever going home. So if you ever wonder why any native population of any place ever questions the United States about relocation, okay, and Canadians. Imagine you're just enjoying penguin meat on your island and then you get sniped. So yeah, I probably went too far on this, but it's a pretty cool piece of history, right? That's a pretty cool, I mean, it's not cool like, as in like, oh yeah, awesome cool, but like, this is shit they don't teach you about. They don't want you to know that Japan actually ground invasion on the United States on this island. There was actually its major battle. They wanted to divert U.S. resources. Turns out it diverted their own. There was 2 battles. There was like a ghost battle. There was submarines and shit like that. Like whatever. Like that's just like a cool little thing. What was the moral of this story? Never trust a government that wants to help you out. If they say I'm from the government and I'm here to help, I don't know.